Right, so let's kick off. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Future Terms, Looking After Each Other After Lockdown. My name's Shelley Gonsalves, and I'm the Executive Director for Program Delivery here at teachfirst, and I'll be your chair for this afternoon's event. We are delighted you're joining us. And before we go any further, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that we're recording, as we would like to share this event with future audiences, and we'll make it available after in case you want to go back to any particular bits. Schools will be at the heart of our country's efforts to recover from our current crisis. We know they're already doing all they can to prepare the next generation for a new era and are working hard to build a fair education for all. We want to help, so we've put together a series of panel discussions featuring expert voices from across the sector to help our schools start planning for some of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. None of us can predict the future, but we can all work together to explore how schools can support their pupils and their whole school community to emerge, rebuild, and adapt to define their own future terms. We acknowledge that globally and locally here in England, the entire nation has experienced a collective trauma with COVID-19 and more recently through a widespread acknowledgement of the systematic oppression of Black people and people of color exemplified through recent events in America, widespread demonstrations, and the Black Lives Matter movement. This panel today will explore what approaches schools can prioritize and implement to address mental health difficulties, as well as to proactively rebuild and protect the resilience and well-being of the whole school community. Let's meet our panel. This afternoon, we are joined by Cornelia Lucey, a psychologist and positive leadership consultant from LiveWise. Hello, Cornelia.
Hello, everyone.
We're joined by Jaz Ampaw-Farr, resilience ninja, international speaker and author, also secretly awesome. Lisa Fathers, director of teaching school and partnerships at the Alliance for Learning Teaching School, part of the Bright Futures Educational Trust. Hello, Lisa.
Hi there.
Tom Shaw, senior manager of research and development from Carr Manor Community School. Welcome, Tom. So you can read more about our panelists on the website, and Jacob should be popping that into the chat now, including their Twitter handles, just in case you want to consider and continue conversations after the panel this afternoon. You're going to have the opportunity to ask questions, and you can submit these through the Twitter debate using hashtag FutureTermsPanel or directly into the Q&A function here on Zoom. We're not going to be able to get to all of the questions, but we're going to do our best, and we're going to see where the conversation takes us this afternoon. So let's meet our panelists. We're going to hear from each of our panelists. They're going to give us about 5 minutes of a bit of a talk about their areas of expertise and what they're interested in on this topic, and then we're going to jump right into the questions. So Cornelia, over to you.
Great, thanks Shelley, and good afternoon everyone. Thanks for joining this really important discussion. I think it's really great that we're all on here and there's so many people listening. I think being mindful of how we look after one another after lockdown is going to be really, really key to how we come out of this and how successfully we come out of this. It will make the difference, I think, in my opinion, between sustainable recovery and some burnout. And I think there's so much we can do to put in place to prevent that from happening. And thankfully, the latest applied research into, well-being, resilience, positive leadership shows us really that the most effective ways to best look after each other are there. And so we don't need to guess at this stuff. As a psychologist, I hope it's useful to just share some evidence-based strategies from latest research and practice. And I'm sharing these today, not as a one-size-fits-all solution, but really, as every context is different, it's just an opportunity for anyone listening there today to get some ideas and think about, actually, there is a lot of light for opportunity for proactively rebuilding and protecting resilience and well-being, as Shelley just mentioned there. I think before I suppose go into a couple of those strategies, I think there's a couple of things I think are really important to talk about when we enter into this type of discussion. And firstly, you've mentioned there, Shelley, about this collective trauma idea, and you're bang on the button with that. There has been a collective trauma, but I think we also need to acknowledge that how that gets experienced is going to be really different for everybody. There's all types of trauma that we can go through, from acute trauma to chronic trauma to complex trauma. as a result of trauma, we could have post-traumatic stress disorder, you could have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But really the support for no matter what type of trauma you've experienced as a result of all of this kind of mad situation that we've been in is actually being made to feel safe. So although this experience is going to have felt really differently for everybody, so we know that there's lots of kids in our schools, staff in our schools who've gone through grieving, perhaps who've experienced more domestic violence than prior to this experience. One thing we can do, regardless of what someone's experience is to support them to feel safe in their environment. And that goes for the students as well as the staff, so teachers, leaders. The good news is that some of the things we know that build safety are also some of the things that build well-being and resilience. And they're all the same for everybody, which is great. So we can draw on those techniques and we can use them to help every child, every teacher, every leader, no matter what their experience has been. And there's some of the same positive leadership practices that I'm sure, you know, lots of our panelists today will already be really expert in demonstrating. So making sure that we're demonstrating compassion for the situation is going to be really key. Making sure we're also demonstrating self-compassion, you know, allowing there to be differences on how people are dealing with this experience is going to be so important. There's going to be mistakes. People are going to respond to this not always in the most perfect way, and that's going to be okay. And we're going to make that okay so that we can help build well-being and resilience. There are, you know, increasing the level of mindfulness we have in organisations is going to be really important. And when I say mindfulness, I don't necessarily mean, you know, a particular cookie cutter type mindfulness. I mean actually giving people the opportunity to just focus, concentrate, reflect. And again, schools are incredibly good at creating opportunities for reflection. So if we can do more of that, it's going to build more of a sense of well-being and resilience. And one of the key ones, and I'm sure Tom, Jaz and Lisa will talk about this as well, is quality interaction. So how can we build more quality interaction so people feel really safe in the environments that they're in, student to leader? And that's all about, you know, the good relationships. And one thing I guess I also wanted to talk about today is some of the things that we've been wanting to do more of for years in the school system. There's now our opportunity to do that. There's a huge opportunity and a silver lining around this horrible situation to be really brave and to just really grab the situation and promote more around wellbeing and resilience. It's going to be crucial. So let's just take the opportunity to do as much as we can about this. And I'd say as well to anyone listening today, just use this situation as permission to experiment with how you can build, whatever your level of leadership is, or whatever role you take to build wellbeing and resilience for everyone out there. In terms of, I suppose I had a couple of key things I wanted to talk about. One was how should schools prioritise interventions or approaches to wellbeing in the autumn term. One thing I wanted to share is really it's about slow and sustainable recovery. So let's just not rush things. Schools can be incredibly fast paced. So let's think about the pace that we're going into in the autumn term. So dropping the gears, but not the quality, I think is going to be key. There's a resource that we're going to share after this that will support with that. That was developed by a colleague of mine, Dennis Sims. Also, how do you enhance the good that's already in place? There's some incredible work already in schools around wellbeing and resilience, and how are we going to amplify that in the organisation that you're part of? There's so much that can happen. And one really simple way to reflect on that and think about, okay, what's going on in our school, in our setting, is through a wellbeing model that I often talk about, but actually there's loads out there, so take your pick, which is the PERMA model by Martin Seligman. And we use this a lot in positive psychology. And PERMA, so if we view our school through the lens of PERMA, it's all about thinking, you know, what positive emotions are there? So that's what the P stands for. P is for positive emotions. So how can we in our schools enhance more opportunities for play and for fun when we're coming through this experience? There's so many opportunities already in schools. How can we enhance those? How can we, with E, so the E in PERMA is for engagement. So how can we really grab our interest in our teachers and our learners even more so? The R, and I've spoken about this already, is about relationships. So how can we focus on building the really best relationships? How can we take a massive lens on this? And the relationships really need to happen and need to be in place before any learning happens. It's going to be so important. The M in PERMA is about meaning and belonging, and schools are just buckets full of meaning and purpose. And how do we tap into that for our students and our teachers and our staff again to make them reconnect to the meaning? This will really help build wellbeing and resilience. And the last letter in PERMA is for accomplishment. So how can we magnify a sense of accomplishment through this experience? Yes, it's been horrendous. Yes, it's been really awful. But there's actually been some incredibly successful things that have happened throughout this experience. You know, when I think about the NHS clap for one, who'd have thought we'd get people out on our streets on Thursday nights doing that? That's a really quick win to draw children's attention to draw staff's attention to. And there's going to be so many other things people have accomplished during this time. So we can just tap in on that. And I had got some ideas, but I just want to do a time check with Shelley around how school leaders can support mental health challenges for staff and pupils. So how are we doing?
We're definitely going to want to hear those, Cornelia, but we're going to hear those when we get into the Q&A.
Perfect.
So thank you so much, Cornelia. Jaz, over to you.
Oh, just everything Cornelia said, basically. I mean, the interesting thing about now is that when all the stuff we wanted previously, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have all the testing and Ofsted wasn't terrifying us the whole time? If we could make decisions with our head and our heart, we're here. This is it. This is the time. And there's this real opportunity. But at the same time, it's going to require courage. And the issue is that we've been in a situation where kind of there's so many things to make sure we're doing right that taking a risk feels too dangerous. And at the stage where we're at now, I almost think that there's going to be value is going to be restructured in our society. So before, people who had power and were seen as valuable because they, I don't know, were successful in some way, if they can be agile, they're going to retain that control and power and influence. But if they cannot be agile, it's going to be incredibly hard. Like if I haven't seen you for 6 months and we're mates and we meet up and I say, how are you? And you say, yeah, I'm fine. I've had cancer, but I'm all right now. And I say, oh, you're all right now. Well, the film's starting. Let's get off. I kind of need to acknowledge the fact that you thought you were going to die rather than just going on regardless. And people who do that, because we live in a reciprocity kind of feel of society, like belonging is all part of, I do something for you, not so that you'll do something for me, but so we can live together in harmony. Noticing has got to become really important. And I think before we've had this situation in school where it's just keep swimming. And in a way, it's kind of trying to make that everything is okay when everything is clearly not okay. So what people talk about going back to normal. And I think, well, you can't go back unless you're, I don't know, Marty in Back to the Future. And normal is whatever you describe it to be. We're going forward to something new and different. And we get to define that on our terms. We get to fulfill our values, live our why. And if we choose that course, if we make that choice, it's not a given. And I think there's a lot around well-being before, as I said in the video that I did for you, where we kind of tick the boxes and do enough to make it look as though we're doing it. We go to a spa, we have a bit of cake, tick, well-being, tick. But at the same time, I don't feel like well-being is a thing anymore. I feel like being is the thing. Like people would say, I don't really have an issue with mental health. You've just been in your house with your family for 2 months. Everyone's got issues around health now. It's not well-being, it's being. It's not mental health, it's health. These aren't things that are optional extras. They are fundamental to how we connect, move forward and grow from here on in. So we're writing a new story. And when people talk about rebuilding, why would we rebuild a system that nearly killed us the first time round? Why do we want to rebuild a system where our partners hate our job? Because the best of us goes into giving all of our waking hours to school, and then we've got nothing left for the people we actually gave birth to. I mean, why would you recreate that? How about we redefine what school is for? How about we redefine what it means to serve, to lead, to stand with your own team, your own children, your own community? When I was at school, I had an experience where school was my lifeline. But in particular, it was 5 teachers and some accidental saviours, bit parts of people who just turned up and were amazing. And one of the things I noticed all the time was what I warmed to was people who did with rather than to or for. Mark Finnis talks about this. People do things to children, for children or with children. And with is so powerful. And it works whether it's children or whether it's adults. So I really want us to get curious around what with looks like and not try and appear invincible. The most important thing we could do when we go back is be honest. you know, welcome people, enjoy the fun and the connection again, but be honest about the fact.
Okay, we have lost Jaz, but we will come back to her, and I will make sure to pick up on the question about with later on. But thank you very much, Jaz. In the meantime, Lisa, let's hear from you.
Okay, hi everybody. So first of all, just want to think about the actual process of recovery and make the point that it is a process. It's not something that's overnight, it's a journey. And part of that pace of recovery will very much depend on the residual impacts of the pandemic and things like staff and organisational fatigue. I think the other things to think about here are that actually leaders are really important in this. And, you know, the quality of leadership in each individual school or each individual trust. And I think that, you know, leaders in recovery, first of all, at the moment, it's quite hard to think past the here and now because our school leaders are currently fine-tuning risk assessments, thinking about PPE, thinking about reorganising walkways in school and toilets and social distancing and a whole host of things that actually, as educationalists, we've never had to think about before. So thinking about recovery is quite hard because we're still a lot of us in the here and now. So that's the first point. I think the other things to just think about are that leadership at the moment, for me, seems like we're leading in a really uncertain time. So we're trying to, you know, as leaders, we will always look forward and try and plan ahead and be really strategic as well as getting on with the operational stuff. And it's quite hard to be strategic when every single day things seem to change. It's like a moving feast, if you like. So that planning is quite difficult. I think the other thing is in terms of leadership, actually at the moment, the scale of what we're asking our school leaders to do is so huge and quite overwhelming. And we need to acknowledge that. I think the other thing that we need to acknowledge is that actually our school leaders, our local authority staff, our teachers, our teaching assistants, we've not had a break, not since February half term. So endurance, you know, we talk, don't we, when we talk about physical activity and sport, about, you know, this is a marathon and not a sprint. And it's easy to say those things, but actually, you know, we don't even know if we're halfway through the flipping marathon yet, or whether or not we're anywhere near the end. Are we on the last leg, or actually are we still at the beginning of a marathon? Is it more of a one of those hideous 4-day endurance events, you know, where people where people actually do 4 marathons on the trot? We just don't know, and that's really hard to lead in those conditions, if you like. I think the other points that I wanted to make are we'll have a lot of our school community perhaps suffering from bereavement, whether that's parents or whether that's grandparents or whether that's a friend who's bereaved as well. And our schools are obviously used to dealing with children that have suffered bereavements, but potentially not at this scale. So I think thinking about what does that mean for our teachers in terms of staff training, but also what does it mean in terms of transitioning back to school? You know, what does that support need to look like? Equally, we've got a lot of our children and staff, and I think Cornelia mentioned this, who are quite anxious and with heightened anxiety. And again, that's a moving feast because some of that anxiety is linked to the R number in the local areas and what that's doing. And some of the anxiety will also be linked to how well the school is being led and whether or not those anxieties and staff are being consulted in the right way. The other point that I want to make is that I don't know whether or not any of you have come across the Youth Sport Trust Well Schools movement, which is a new national movement, and it's around 3 pillars. It's being well led, being well prepared in terms of emotional literacy and physical literacy, and also being well equipped. And I quite like that. One of the things that I think we've seen during lockdown in some families has been an increase in physical activity. Obviously, it's not the same because it depends on your family context and where you live and all that kind of stuff. But for some families, they've been moving more, they've been moving more together. And I think that has been huge. So one, because we all know that moving more and physical activity makes us feel better. It's actually, you know, one of the free medicines in life. And 2, those family connections have been strengthened as families move together, because we all know that you get more out of our children when we're walking with them than you do if you sat on the couch or sat across your kitchen table. So how can we make sure that we take some of the lessons learned around moving together as a family, around being more physically active, and make sure that our schools are even more physically active when we go back, and we're not going back to sitting down for 6 hours a day. Not that all schools do that, of course, but you know, how can we just make our schools more active, the culture of them? I can carry on, but I'm conscious that we nipped away from Jaz when she was halfway through. So do you want to put a stop there and come back to me?
Well, we'll stop there, Lisa. I'm going to go to Tom, and then I've got a question to sort of kick this all off and bring it back together. So thank you, Lisa, and over to you, Tom.
I mean, it's a joy to be in such esteemed company, and much of what's said, I think, captures something of the challenge of the situation we're in. The way that we're thinking about it is we're recognising that we've got 3 phases, and so we start with the react phase, which I think we've been in certainly since March. Really thinking on a day-to-day basis as you react to what the latest government announcement is, and you try and work out how you respond to that. We are now beginning to talk about a restore phase, and for us that restore phase began at Carmana. We're a through school, so we have from reception. So that started a few weeks ago now, but actually it started before then. We see that restore phase as being one that we're going to be in for some time, but we want to do the restore phase in a way that means we're able to reset. So it's react, restore and reset. And we see this as a tremendous opportunity, as has been mentioned. It's an opportunity to ask some fundamental questions around the role and purpose of education and our place in it. Within that restore phase, piece of work that I've been involved with and that we're doing both at Carmana and also part of the Leeds Learning Alliance that we're part of in Leeds, is to do with this idea of restore. And the restore, if people want to search it, you do restore our schools. I should speak more clearly, restore our schools, all one word, .com, and all the resources are there. Really that emerged because there was a group of people engaged in restorative practice in schools and wanting to offer something to school leaders, a lens through which they could filter their strategic thinking and operational plans. And certainly for me personally, my connection with it came following some sleepless nights early on in lockdown, as I began to think about what the implications will be for the children and the staff coming back into communities. Last week, I know teachfirst did something on children, so I won't mention that, but some of the implications for staff, for many teachers, and I still do a bit of teaching, not much, but I still do a bit, and in RE. And as a teacher, one of the things that attracts me to the profession is the routine and the structure. It's the contact with children and the teamwork. It's the energy of the environment. And so my job has just been completely redefined. And now the expectation being placed on me are completely different. You're having to become an expert in online learning, and you're having to renegotiate all your relationships. And now as we move into what's probably going to be a phase of blended learning, and we've got incredible pressures on staff as they adapt to what will be some delivery in school, some delivery out of school. And that creates a whole range of tension. That's before you begin to take seriously the implications on staff of the diverse experience they've had at home. And so the restore framework creates a lens for us to think through some of those things. So restore begins with recognition, and that is that recognition, that ongoing deep listening to staff, which requires listening to yourself first. Cornelia mentioned that self-compassion, what's gone on for me, but then also listening carefully to staff. And I think I'd really challenge school leaders. How are you going to create that space where you can genuinely listen to what staff experience has been? Because the boundaries between home and work are now, well, they're non-existent. And actually the real responsibility on school leaders to listen carefully to what's gone on and then adjust some of those expectations. The E on restore is empathy, and we just need bucket loads of empathy in order to get us through this. And that means that sometimes some of the relationships will be different. And I think Lisa picked up on this. I think for schools where there's already been challenges in relationships with staff, that's going to require even more empathy, because some of those places where there's already increased anxiety are going to need to be really attentive to that. The S is for safety. And as Lisa mentioned, I think, gosh, being in school at the moment is a challenging place as you think through these things. But part of the restore framework is the desire to put safety in its proper place. Clearly, we want to prioritise physical safety, but part of me wishes the government, the DfE, would take on the restore lens, because the obsession just talking about safety is a tragedy, because if that's all we do, we're actually not going to be attending to what some of the real needs are in these communities. But it's there. And the T is for trauma, and that's the individual collective trauma. Very mindful of Cornelia's point. We're not talking about clinical trauma here. We're talking about a national experience of stress and challenge. The RS and T then are really looking at the present and the past, but we were really keen in this lens to include opportunity, relationships and engagement, because crisis creates opportunity. And the opportunities to think differently about education, but also I think, given we're focused on staff, really important to recognise that many staff will have had moments of deep reflection on their professional identity, on who they are as people, on what their priorities are. And I think we've got to take that seriously, because that may mean that there are teachers, gosh, we already had a problem with retention in teaching before this, and we may well find we've got a bigger problem coming out. Or maybe we won't, as people get back in touch with what they always loved about teaching in the first place. But making sure we engage with staff on what the opportunities are that they now see. And that's the key about the engagement. Engagement is about encouraging a renewed sense of control and an increased sense of agency. I was in a meeting today where we were talking with some staff around what some of the opportunities are that are coming up. And it was absolutely inspiring to hear the online learning, online CPD, access to resource that staff have taken advantage of. And they've come back inspired, come back looking at how they can think differently about school. And I think there's a real opportunity for both individual staff to think that through, but also for school leaders to find ways that they can exploit it. The challenges we now face are bigger and more complex than anything we have ever seen. And therefore, we need to make sure we are using every resource at our disposal. And I think for schools where perhaps there've been quite hierarchical decision-making processes, this would be a really good time to look differently at that, because we need to make the most of the resource we've got. And one of the best resource we've got is the adults in the community. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to stop there. But always much more that could be said.
Well, so much more to say. So thank you so much, Tom. Y'all, we've had some great questions coming through. So I'm gonna kick off with a question that I think really speaks to a theme that's kind of been coming up from everyone. And this one's from Joanne. So thank you, Joanne, for this. How can we match a focus on positivity and well-being with the negative government narrative about deficit, failure, the need to catch up? I think this speaks to your point, Jaz, about rebuild. Do we really want to rebuild the thing that was a little bit broken? So, Jaz, I'm going to go to you first on this one, because we lost you for a moment there, and I think you were starting to touch on this point. So how do we match and speak to that focus on positivity and well-being, which really everyone on the panel is kind of speaking to here, with the kind of dominant negative narrative?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're such an easy target. I mean, we get paid crap money. We work all hours. We do it out of the love for it. I mean, you might as well have victim tattooed on your forehead. The press are always going to come after us. That's not going to change. That if we wait until the press suddenly go, oh, by the way, school's doing a great job, let's start a campaign to get rid of GCSEs. Never going to happen. So while we are in this space of actually showing ourselves, COVID has showed schools what they actually are: true pillars of the community, families of people who, no matter what, will show up with their whole self. That is, we've been shown, the truth is there. And so rather than kind of leaning into the negatives and reacting to the negatives, which is so hard and also requires quite a lot of energy, let's write our own story. Why we did this with Ofsted, we you know those banners that say our school is good, Ofsted says our school is good. There's not many that say, there's not a roaring trade in Ofsted says our school's rubbish, is there? Nobody buys them. Ofsted says our school is good. And I always think, what we celebrate, Ofsted says that, and that's great, but Ofsted is asking you to do this bare minimum. Let's celebrate the truth about you. How about a banner that says we love our kids? How about a banner that says we are intrinsically invested in the success of every student in this school? How about a banner that says our teachers care about you? The moment you walk in this door, you're valued. Because we don't celebrate the truth about ourselves. We tell the kids to. We say to the kids, you know, celebrate progress, celebrate. But do we do it? Do we model that? And I think at this time, the temptation to lean in and defend and react to this story out here, which is actually not the truth about this story in here, would be a real kind of sad step to take. Our choice has to be to tell our own story. Because this story, this 2020 story, is the story you're going to be telling for the rest of your life. And I don't want it to be a boring, I'm sat in the old people's home saying, oh, during COVID, I was a teacher. I was terrified. I just kept my head down and just got really angry on Twitter. What a boring story. You're not going to have anyone who wants to sit next to you. I want to be a story of the opportunity. Something hit me. It was so huge. I didn't know what to do. It was the opposite of when someone dies and your world stops, but the whole world carries on. Because in COVID, the world stopped. And I had to choose whether I carried on doing the same thing and hoping for a different result, or whether I reflected, stopped, reframed, took responsibility for only the things that were mine.
So the internet strikes again. Did anyone else have a thought on this one about this positivity? Lisa, over to you, and then we'll go to Cornelia.
I think what Jaz was saying is absolutely right. It's about us reframing it. It's about us staying away from all that negativity and actually owning it. And I think that's about integrity. It's about doing the right things, whether somebody's watching or not, and making sure that we know that we're doing them for the right reasons. And actually, you know, the majority of school leaders have always done that. We make the right decisions for our children in our community based on our context. And you know, if the kids pass exams as well, then that's an added bonus. But it is about doing the right things for our children. And actually, I think school leaders have been doing that for a long time. And you're right, this is an opportunity to relook at that and make sure we're doing it in an even more explicit way, in a way that's right for absolutely everybody, and not being drawn into that negativity and just reframing it and owning it, like Jaz said. Yeah. And Cornelia, I noticed that you were going to say something as well.
No, I totally echo what you were saying and what Jaz was saying. I think it's about having conviction, and it's that ongoing bravery, isn't it, to just step out from all of what you're seeing. And I think just from a psychological perspective, you know, we do have a negativity bias in our minds. Society has a negativity bias. There's a draw into the negative, and we have to break that mold purposefully for ourselves as adults, as leaders, as teachers, and we need to help children see that. So I'd encourage, actually, as a discussion point, to almost reflect on some of the stories that have come out, so some misinformation versus what's the truth, and explore that together. Rewrite the narrative together in your classrooms and look at, actually, what is the truth here? You know what the truth is. How do we respond to this? And just take it back.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that teaching children to actually explore the news in an objective way is really important in terms of unpicking that narrative and actually what is it that people are saying and what's the real story behind that and what's fact and what's fiction. I just think one other point, Shelley, you mentioned about the use of the terms catch up. I think that is really damaging, because actually where's the catch up? Everybody has had, you know, some gap in learning, haven't they? And you know, some to some degree and some to less degree, depending on the family circumstance, whether parents have been working or not, all that kind of stuff. So actually, we don't need to catch up. What we need to do is reframe the endpoints, you know, and think differently. And for a lot of our children, you know, thinking about where they might be at the end of year 11 in terms of having a rich knowledge and you know, what gaps in knowledge do we need to plug, rather than thinking about how do we catch the kids up to make sure that they're on track to get their grade in X, Y, and Z. I think is really important.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on another question here, which is looking at a different aspect than we've been covering thus far. And I think it speaks to what you've all been saying about the fact that we've just taken a big pause. We've just had a timeout. We've all been stuck at home. And this notion of reflection. So we have a great question coming through. How do we encourage a culture of reflection and authenticity in schools where this might not currently be present? I'm going to start with you on this one, Tom, because a lot of what you talked about in your restore model, I think, speaks to some of the importance of this taking a bit of a pause. So, Tom, over to you.
Yeah, and I think in some ways the restore model is there to encourage leaders to think in that way. I think one of the key things there, which I mentioned around opportunity and engagement, is how do we avoid. And I think picking up on Jazzy's point about the to and the with, one of the dangers is if we just focus on the safety, we end up moving into the to model, where we feel compelled to do things to people to keep them safe. And that can be a good thing. We tend to talk about it in terms of peacekeeping. But in actual fact, in order to address the really complex challenges that we face, we need to find ways of engaging people. What does that look like in practice? For us, that's a continuation of practice that we've already embedded in our schools. So every Monday morning we have staff circles where teaching and non-teaching staff, there's a blend in each circle, and we meet and we reflect on, we check in on what's going on the weekend, we look at what's going on the week. All of our CPD is run with it out of those circles. So at the moment we're running whole staff CPD on Zoom, we're doing breakout rooms, we're engaging in conversation, and we're getting feedback. So that we can recognise that actually there isn't one small group that carries all of the answers, but actually we need to be engaged with the insights of the whole community. That's a key part of the Restore model in terms of recognition. But it's also finding those processes to ensure that we're empowering staff with a sense of agency, so that they can take control over what's next. I think there's lots of practical ideas. As always with these things, it depends on where people's starting point is. And I think where you've got schools that don't already have that space, that is going to be a challenge. But there are ways of doing it. And people should, I mean, the people gathered here would be good people to follow up conversations with. But what this current crisis does is it enables us to recognise just how important it is. And if we haven't been doing it before, we really do need to do it now.
Thank you so much. Anyone else want to come in on this? Yes, come on, Lisa.
It was just to say that what Tom said then about, you know, the people on this panel, actually, I think we just need to remember that schools don't need to do stuff on their own. There are things called teaching schools that encourage schools to collaborate. There are local authorities, there are schools in neighbouring areas, there are multi-academy trusts. Schools can be part of families of schools. And actually, you know, collaboration is at the heart of you know, a lot of what we need to do to move forward, so that people are not reinventing the wheel. Head teachers are not having to think you know, about doing things in isolation. People are muddling through these waters together, aren't they? So let's share the learning, let's collaborate, let's work together, let's make sure that things are joined up and that we're all working together actually as a team of school leaders and teachers. And I think we've seen that kind of sense of teamwork, haven't we, on social media in the last few months, and let's keep that going.
I think it's a really good point, because I'm not sure whether, I mean, others may not agree, but I feel like we've actually been reaping the consequences of years of encouraging competition in the education sector, which has been quite divisive. Whereas actually part of what crisis does is it forces us into a situation that recognises that collaboration is the only way we can move forward.
Yeah.
We're going to put on, it's not something we normally do, but lots of schools have talked to us about the use of circles with both staff and children. So we're in the next few weeks, we'll put on a webinar to invite people so they can come and find out a bit more about it. It's that desire to want to be able to offer perhaps good practice you've discovered that may be more timely now for other schools in ways that now there's the need and demand to pursue it.
Thank you.
And if I could just add in, if that's all right, Shelley, I think, you know, for a really practical level, thinking about whatever position you're in a school, how reflective your school is, I think there are opportunities, if there's anyone listening here who's kind of quite early on in their career, and I noticed from some of the comments that there were, that actually just thinking about how you role model reflection for your class and start to get your class to reflect together, you know, whether it's in the morning, how are you feeling, what's going on for you, let's talk about that, let's reflect on that. Or, you know, at the beginning of a lesson or the end of a lesson, you know, using it as part of the starter, part of the plenary. There's lots of ways that you can just start to nudge it in that direction of being more reflective, even if you feel, hang on a second, I can't control what's going on in my school. So I just thought I'd add that in.
Thank you, Cornelia. I've got a question, you guys, and it's been coming up quite a bit as a bit of a theme. I know you touched on it, Lisa, this uncertainty that exists for everyone. We don't exactly know what we're going back to in September. Got a great question here. How can we prepare for next year when it's so uncertain?
When you're sort of moving into something that's new and different, there's all sorts of assumptions over what's going to work, but everybody feels and thinks something different. So there's something around community that means we all want to be together, but we actually all got on each other's nerves as well. And the kind of grace around that and being able to say, okay, so it's not always going to work. And I think that's the most important thing. Give yourself a chance to get it wrong. we would never hone down on the kids because they've made a mistake and, oh, you'll never be a writer, give it up. We'd always encourage them to do more. So I would plan for getting it wrong. I mean, move forward into, we're going to get it wrong. It's fine. Let's get it wrong together. And also there's the thing around being human first. I keep coming back to this. I've got a course called Human First, and it literally is, I did it at the beginning of lockdown to kind of walk people through 2 weeks of leading yourself, like practical tips, tools, things you can do, and 2 weeks to leading others. But it does start with ourselves. I mean, rather than just kind of coming in and saying to people, right, we're going to do this and let's do this. All great ideas. And everyone always wants strategies, don't we? We always want, just give us a clue to respond to the need of the people who rely on you. What would you do? Because that's the situation we're in. And I love the point about collaboration. I mean, why we have to wait until we're in a map before we'll talk to each other is beyond me. You know, every single school is coping with the same thing as you, with the same amount of resources and the same pressure. If there was any other time to get in the car and drive down the road and go, right, you do this and I'll do that, it's now. Now's the time, because we're not really in competition. We never were in competition. If the kids win, we all win. So there's no competition element to be afraid of. This is the time for kind of leaning in. And for me, the whole thing is around, we say with the kids, we want them to, the kids need to be safe, be well, and be seen. Then we can start education. Well, it's the same for staff. How do we make staff feel safe and well and seen? But the most important thing about this is there's autonomy here. You've got to take responsibility for your own well-being. I always feel when people are waiting for someone else to tell them what to do and do their, you know, you're a leader, you're not a parent, you're not a mum to these people. People have to kind of step up and say, you know, I need this. So if people need something, make a request. And if you don't need help, then look at where you can help someone else. If we apply the same rules that we put in an infant classroom to the teachers, I think the why of it would be everything is around routine. Everything is around embedded practice. If your value...
Just lost Jaz. Come on, Lisa.
What I was going to say was that question about, you know, how do we plan for next year? You know, it's really hard. So don't plan yet. You know, wait till we actually have a few more parameters, because you could spend hours and hours and hours planning scenario A, and actually it's going to be scenario C. So I would just plan what you can, you know, do what you can, plan what we know, and don't waste time, because you're probably quite tired at the moment. So it might be that planning can wait.
Tom, you were going to come in.
Just another part of the Restore framework is there's recognition, empathy, safety, trauma, opportunity, and relationships. And I think the thing that I'd be planning for most is relationships.
Yeah.
Planning the way in which you will build, maintain, repair those relationships. And I think particularly for staff, regardless of where you are at your stage in your career, making sure that you're prioritising that, whether you're a senior leader, looking at how you're making sure that the staff have space for building those relationships. Bruce Perry talks about relational dosing as an effective way of helping people manage unpredictable, uncontrollable, extreme stress. And I think staff need a lot of relational dosing, moments of connection, particularly with senior leaders, so that they remain connected and valued. And I think those are things you can plan for. I think for staff, anticipate, often as teachers, I think we often get preoccupied with wanting to have our lesson plans sorted.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. But actually, this is an opportunity, as I mentioned, I was in a meeting today, hearing colleagues, and how are they planning? Well, they're planning by really immersing themselves in their subject knowledge. They're learning more about cognitive science. So rather than focusing in on the specific planning that perhaps we would normally associate with that, actually seeing planning as being a much broader spectrum, and seeing ways that we can be upskilling. It's one of the great opportunities, I think, that schools have in this space, because in many circumstances, there may well be some spare capacity for some staff. Again, wanting to recognise different staff will be in different places. When I'm at home, I'm homeschooling my 7-year-old and my 16-year-old. Well, my 6-year-old just looks after himself, but my 7-year-old gets a bit of attention. But there are staff in different circumstances, and I think planning to make the most of the capacity they can bring.
And I guess, part of that wider planning then might be looking after yourself. Planning for, autumn might be you getting yourself really fit. It might be sleeping well. It might be eating well. It might be getting yourself to be the best that you can possibly be for whatever the return to school, in the full-time way is.
So this is a perfect segue. So we've got a question coming through from someone who is brand new to teaching, preparing to start school in September. I understand it will be a really challenging time, even for the most experienced of teachers, which is quite intimidating. So we talked about COVID being a time to reframe and reset. How do you do that as a new trainee when you don't quite know what the problems were pre-COVID? What is our advice to colleagues new to this profession coming into this unexpected time?
I hear that actually, although you haven't been in school and you haven't experienced what it's been like to be in school, you've had your own personal experience. So you've not escaped this situation. And in a way, and I don't know if it is right now, but I guess take some reassurance and comfort from that actually, you have had your own experiences, your family will have been affected, your friends will have been affected in different ways. And just, bring that understanding and empathy you have with your own situation into the school context. Earlier on, I was going to talk about some of the things that we can do to help people overcome challenges. And I suppose it's linked to the previous question in terms of preparation, but it links into what this person has bravely asked, which is, what are the things that we know help support people when they've gone through challenges? And I carried out some research into this recently, and it links to a lot of what we've heard already, but there were 4 key themes that came out. And one was, the first one was about normalizing feelings. So you may not have gone through that experience yourself, but actually just notice that others have been going through an experience, that you've been going through an experience, and it's okay if you haven't been through that exact experience, but just normalize and just, appreciate and show recognition that, it's all been crazy. I don't have a clue what's been going on, but it's just been absolutely crazy. And I can imagine how crazy that's been. And this links very much to when we're looking at that PERMA model, thinking around, engagement with one another and relationships. So how can I normalize the fact that you've had a really strange experience? We've all had strange experiences. The second theme that came through that was really helpful for people, and that might be helpful for you as you're preparing to go into schools, is just helping people when you're having conversations, either yourself or you're noticing other people having conversations. How can you help people connect the dots of their experience? So how can you, when you're kind of going into this new environment, how can you say, well, actually, can you tell me what that was like for you? What was that experience like? This is what it was like for me. And just help join the dots together for one another. The third theme that is really important in supporting people to overcome challenges is, thinking about building positive emotions. And again, this can link to preparation. So how can I actually just tap in on what's been really good for you in this experience? What has been positive? Okay, so Tom's example, he's been at home with a 7-year-old and a 16-year-old, at times wanting to tear his hair out, I'm sure. But there will be something that, in that you'll have had a positive experience from it. And if there's some positive emotions that we can help tap in, if you can bring as a new trainee what's been good for you prior to coming into the school context and just share that will help lift up people around you. You may have finished university recently, you may be changing careers, just share some of the good that's come from that, and that will naturally help lift people up. And the fourth thing that really helps people to overcome challenges, and it links into some of what Lisa and Tom and Jaz have been saying, is creating a safe space, of a warm space to share thoughts and feelings. So you may not have gone through the experience, but you can be that person that other beginner teacher comes to talk to, or even a school leader shares what's been going on. But I just say, don't worry, it'll be okay. And just recognise that your experience, whether you've been in school or not, is valid, and just bring that with you.
Lisa.
Can I just add a couple of things, just to say, first of all, congratulations and welcome to the best profession ever. You're going to have a wonderful time, and I'm sure you'll find it really rewarding. I think the second thing to say is that you're not on your own. So you will obviously be supported through your year. You will have a mentor. You may already have been linked up with the department. Give them a shout. Let them know that you're feeling anxious. Chat to them. Say, what's it like in school at the moment? What do you think it's going to be like in September? Just talk to people, because you are not on your own. And I'm sure that wherever you're doing your training year or your NQT year, I can't remember which one you said, I'm sure that the community around you will want to support you. And I think the biggest mistake that trainees and NQTs make is not saying help. Because actually, you know, everybody needs help, and it's fine to ask for help, and it's also fine to ask all the time. If you don't understand something, I still do it every day, and be really humble about that, and that's absolutely fine, and that will get you on. So good luck.
Thanks, Lisa. Tom, some advice for our new entrant to the profession?
Yeah, I think just to echo what's been said, I think the reality is teaching is a profession when you can often experience quite high levels of stress and anxiety. And that actually doesn't stop when you've been in the profession for some time. There are still moments when you feel like things aren't quite as in control. And I think all teachers, to some extent, as I mentioned when I started, you know, they thrive on stress. But they strive on predictable, moderate and controllable stress. And we're now in a situation where it's unpredictable, it's uncontrollable, and it's quite extreme. And I think to recognise that everybody's in the same situation, and I love Cornelia's language around normalising, I think is really useful. And making that connection with people in school. It is so important that you continue to embrace your vulnerability. And acknowledge what you are concerned about and ask the question, because so often if we don't, we can find ourselves getting more and more anxious because we don't know the answer without realizing nobody does. And so actually that's one less thing that we don't need to be anxious about, because that's carried by the community. So certainly I'd encourage that kind of openness.
Thank you so much, Tom. We're running low on time, so I just want to do a little bit of summing up. We've talked a lot today about, instead of focusing on rebuilding, focusing on redefining. And I think what's been a real theme of the conversation today has just been the huge opportunity that we're faced with when we return to schools in September. I think we've had a lot of conversation about the importance of reflection, the importance of relationships, both within the school building, within the profession, and beyond. And I think I've written this down a few times. Now is the time. This is the thing that I've written down, a bit of a call to action. And before I thank our panel, I just want to kind of ask everyone to take this one question away, which I found really, really compelling. We won't have time to answer it today. But the question that came through, that I think is one for all of us to consider, as we think about now being the time to do the things maybe we always wanted to do or try in school. What would education be like if we put well-being and human flourishing at the heart of everything we do? Brilliant question. We don't have time for it, but a wonderful thing for all of us to really reflect on as we leave the panel here today. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists today. Thank you, Cornelia, to Lisa, to Jaz, to Tom. It's been brilliant to have you today, to hear about your experiences, your expertise, and for all of the insights that you've shared with us today. Just want to let everybody know that the recording of the panel is going to be available on our website. And we would love to keep the conversation going. I've shared that big question with you, so thank you to the person who asked that question. It's a brilliant one. Let's keep the conversation going on Twitter using the hashtag FutureTermsPanel. And we've got 2 more panel events coming, both of the next Thursdays, same time, same place. And when you go onto our website, you can register to what's up there if you haven't already done so. It's been a brilliant afternoon. It's given me a lot of food for thought, and just a final note to everybody, whether you're ending the school year or just getting ready to get started for the first time in your career, just a huge thank you to everyone for everything that you do for young people all across the country, and wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.